"You can sleep downstairs, Mom. The baby needs this room more than you do." Darren said it without looking at her. Celeste stood beside him with a nursery catalog pressed against her chest, already talking about paint colors, blackout curtains, and where the crib would go. And Marlene Whitaker, 72 years old, stood in the middle of the bedroom she had paid for, staring at her own son as if the floor had tilted under her feet. The room went very still after that. Rain tapped against the window. Soft, cold, steady. Marlene's fingers tightened around the edge of her quilt, the same quilt she had slept under for 12 winters in that room. Her late husband's photo sat on the dresser. His reading glasses were still in the top drawer. Even now, the room still smelled faintly like lavender and old wood polish. Celeste gave a small, impatient sigh. "It's not personal," she said. "We just need the space. The basement is finished enough. It's not like we're putting you outside." Finished enough. That was how she described the basement. A low ceiling, one tiny window near the ground, concrete walls that held the cold even in spring, a folding bed Darren had promised to replace months ago, a room for old boxes, broken lamps, and things nobody wanted near the light. Marlene looked at Darren again. He rubbed the back of his neck, like this was uncomfortable for him too, and maybe that was supposed to make it kinder. "It's just for a while," he said. "You know how much stuff a baby needs." For a while. That was the same thing he had said 8 months earlier when he and Celeste moved in. "Just for a while, Mom. Just until we get back on our feet. Just until the market settles down. Just until the baby comes." Every promise had come with a softer voice than this one. Every promise had stayed longer than it should. Marlene did not raise her voice. That was the strange part. She could feel the hurt rising in her chest like heat, but it never made it to her mouth. It stayed there, heavy and sharp, pressing against her ribs. She turned toward the closet. Celeste blinked, almost surprised there would be no fight. "Thank you for understanding," she said quickly, already sounding relieved. "Honestly, this is best for everyone." Marlene reached for her housecoat, then her slippers, then the small framed picture from the dresser. Her movements were slow, careful, almost gentle. But there was something in the quiet that should have warned them both. Because a woman did not spend 5 decades surviving marriage, loss, work, debt, and widowhood without learning what silence could hide. Behind her, Celeste stepped into the room as if it already belonged to her. "I was thinking the crib could go near the window," she said. "And maybe we can get rid of this old chair. It doesn't really match anything." Old chair. It was the rocking chair Marlene's husband had built with his own hands the year Darren was born. Darren finally looked up. "Celeste?" But he did not tell her to stop. He did not say, "That was Dad's chair." He did not say, "This is still Mom's room." He did not say anything that sounded like a son. That hurt more than the room itself. Marlene lifted the photo frame and held it to her chest. In the picture, her husband was smiling into the sun, one hand shielding his eyes. Darren was 12 then, skinny, gap-toothed, still sweet enough to run to the door when she came home from work. Back then, he used to ask if she was tired. Back then, he used to carry grocery bags without being told. Back then, he used to say, "One day I'm gonna take care of you." She wondered when those words had turned into this. No one helped her carry anything downstairs. Not Darren, not Celeste. They let her do it alone, one armful at a time. While upstairs, they kept discussing nursery themes in voices too bright for the moment. Moon and stars, soft yellow, maybe little lambs on the wall. By the second trip, Marlene's knee was aching. By the third, she had stopped hearing the words clearly. All she could hear was the basement door creaking open. The air down there felt damp against her face. It smelled like cardboard, old paint, and something faintly metallic. The lamp in the corner flickered once before holding steady. On the narrow bed sat a folded sheet set that did not belong to her. No one had even made the bed. She placed her quilt down first, then the photo, then the little tin box where she kept her late husband's watch, 2 birthday cards from Tessa, and a church bulletin from the last Easter they spent together. Upstairs, footsteps crossed the ceiling above her. Her bedroom ceiling. Now, someone else's nursery floor. That was when the humiliation finally landed. Not loud, not dramatic, just deep. A woman could survive grief easier than disrespect. Grief came from love. This came from entitlement. Marlene sat on the edge of the bed and listened. Celeste laughed at something upstairs. Darren's voice followed, low, tired, agreeing. And for one brief second, Marlene closed her eyes and let herself feel exactly what they had done. They had not moved her for survival. They had moved her for comfort. Their comfort, their plans, their future. In the very house she had bought with insurance money, overtime pay, and years she could never get back. But she did not cry. Not yet. Instead, she bent down to place her Bible in the milk crate beside the bed. The leather cover was worn soft from years of use. Something inside shifted when she set it down. Marlene frowned. She opened it carefully. A yellowed envelope had slipped loose from between the Psalms and the Gospel of John. Her breath caught. She knew that envelope. She had not seen it in years. Her fingers hovered over the paper, suddenly cold. Outside, thunder rolled far away. Upstairs, Darren and Celeste were still planning the baby's room. Down in the basement, Marlene stared at the envelope her husband had hidden before he died. And in that moment, for the first time that night, something inside her did not break. It woke up. The next morning, Marlene woke before sunrise because the basement would not let her sleep past the cold. Her back ached, her knee felt stiff, and for a few seconds in that gray half-light, she forgot where she was. Then she looked up at the low ceiling, heard water moving through old pipes, and remembered. They had taken her room. Upstairs, she could hear cabinets opening. Celeste was already awake, moving fast, talking on the phone. Her voice carried through the floorboards in broken pieces. Yes, finally. The nursery is going upstairs. More natural light. Marlene sat up slowly and reached for her robe. No one came down to ask if she had slept well. No one asked whether the basement was too cold. That hurt in a different way now. Not like a blow. More like proof. She climbed the stairs one careful step at a time and found Celeste in the kitchen, holding a mug and scrolling through her phone. Swatches of pale yellow paint were spread across the table beside a list titled Baby Room Budget. Celeste looked up. Oh, you're up. Just that. Not good morning. Not how are you feeling. Not I'm sorry. Marlene moved to the coffee maker and poured herself the last of what was left in the pot. It was weak and lukewarm. Celeste glanced at the mug in her hand, then back to the paint samples. I was thinking, she said, casual as a weather report, if we move some of your old things out of that room today, it'll be easier for Darren to start painting this weekend. Your old things. Marlene held the mug with both hands. The words were simple, the kind people used every day. But in Celeste's mouth, they had a way of shrinking a whole life into clutter. She did not answer. That silence seemed to encourage Celeste. We need to be practical now, she went on. Babies change everything. We can't organize the house around sentiment. Marlene turned and looked at her then. Really looked at her. Celeste was not cruel in the loud way. She was worse. She was efficient, clean, certain. She spoke like someone removing furniture from a room, not dignity from a person. And upstairs, Darren was just quiet enough to help it happen. That was the part Marlene could not stop turning over in her mind. Not Celeste. Darren. Her son had not become unrecognizable overnight. It had happened in pieces. Small excuses, small retreats, small failures to speak when speaking mattered. That morning, while Celeste talked about paint, Marlene remembered a different Darren. A skinny boy with scraped knees and a backpack too big for his shoulders. A teenager waiting by the window when she worked late. A young man standing at his father's funeral, crying so hard he could barely breathe. After the funeral, he had held her hand in the church parking lot and said, "You won't have to carry everything alone anymore, Mom, I promise." She had believed him. Back then, belief had come easy. After her husband died, Marlene had worked double shifts at the pharmacy for 6 years. She sold her jewelry. She canceled the trip they had once dreamed about taking. She clipped coupons, repaired things instead of replacing them, paid every bill on time. And when the mortgage was finally gone, she stood in that living room with the deed in her hand and cried in a way no one saw. That house was not just a house. It was every late night, every tired morning, every sacrifice Darren had forgotten because he had never had to watch her make it. A floorboard creaked overhead. Marlene looked up instinctively. Her bedroom, her old room. Then Darren walked into the kitchen, already dressed for work, tying his watch as he moved. He gave his mother a quick glance. Just one. "You okay down there?" he asked. "Down there, not in your room, not after what we did, just down there." Marlene gave a small nod. Darren grabbed a banana from the counter. Good, because Celeste and I were talking, and we may need to clear more space once the baby comes. Maybe the hallway closet, too. We're just trying to make the house work. The house. Not your house, Mom. The house. He said it like he had already inherited it in his mind. Then he kissed Celeste, picked up his keys, and left. The front door closed. For a long moment, the kitchen stayed silent. Celeste gathered her paint samples. I'll be out for a few hours, she said. There's soup in the fridge if you want something easy. Easy. Everything with her came dressed as kindness after the damage was done. When the car pulled out of the driveway, the house grew still. That was when Marlene went back downstairs. The Bible was waiting where she had left it, on the milk crate beside the bed. She sat carefully, the springs beneath her giving a tired little groan, and slipped the yellowed envelope into her lap. She recognized her husband's handwriting before she even opened it. The sight of it made her throat tighten. For a second, she saw him the way he had looked near the end. Thinner, quieter, watching more than he spoke, as if he knew there were things he would not be around to protect her from. Marlene slid one finger beneath the flap. Inside was a folded note and a business card. She opened the note first. The paper trembled in her hand. Marlene, if you are reading this, then something in this house has changed in a way I prayed it never would. You have always been too patient with the people you love. If the day comes when this home stops feeling like yours, go see Harold Bennett. Do not argue first. Do not warn anyone. Just go. At the bottom was his name, and beneath it, one final line. You are not as powerless as they think. Marlene read that last sentence twice, then a third time. Above her, she heard a dull thump from upstairs. Someone moving furniture. Her furniture. She lifted the business card and stared at the name printed there. Harold Bennett, attorney at law. Outside, a car door slammed. Celeste was home early. Marlene folded the note with slow, steady hands and slid it back into the envelope. For the first time since they pushed her into the basement, she was not thinking about where she had slept. She was thinking about where she needed to go next. And upstairs, footsteps started moving toward the basement door. Celeste stopped halfway down the basement stairs when she saw Marlene sitting on the edge of the bed. For 1 second, neither woman spoke. Then Celeste's eyes dropped to the envelope in Marlene's hand. "What's that?" she asked. Marlene slid it back into her Bible and closed the cover. "Just an old paper." Celeste stood there a moment longer, one hand resting on the rail. Her face was smooth, pleasant almost, but her eyes lingered too long. Curious, measuring. "Well," she said at last, "I just came down to say the delivery guy is bringing the crib tomorrow. So if there's anything else upstairs you still want, you should probably get it today." Anything else upstairs. As if Marlene were collecting the last scraps of herself before they cleared the room for a new life. She gave a small nod. Celeste waited, maybe hoping for a question, maybe hoping for resistance. When none came, she turned and went back up. The basement door closed. Marlene sat still until she heard the washing machine start. Then she opened the Bible again. Her husband's note looked different the second time, sharper, less like memory, more like instruction. Do not argue first. Do not warn anyone. Just go. That line settled into her chest and stayed there. All morning, the house above her sounded busier than usual. Cabinet doors, a vacuum, Celeste humming to herself, then a phone call, then another. At one point, Marlene heard laughter drift through the ceiling, followed by Celeste saying, "It's finally starting to feel like our home." Our home. Marlene closed her eyes. There it was again. Not cruelty with a raised voice, not rage, something colder, the confidence of people who believed they were already entitled to what had not been given. By 11 o'clock, Marlene had made up her mind. She changed into her navy coat, the one she wore to church in winter. She brushed her hair, put on lipstick, though only a little. Then she slipped the envelope and business card into her handbag. When she came upstairs, Celeste was arranging baby clothes on the dining table in neat pastel stacks. She looked up, surprised. "You're going out?" "For a little while," Marlene said. Celeste's brows lifted. "Where?" Marlene reached for her purse. "Downtown." Celeste gave a quick smile that did not reach her eyes. "Do you need me to drive you?" It sounded helpful, but it landed wrong. Marlene had heard that tone before, the kind people used when they wanted to know more than they wanted to help. "No," she said. I'll manage. For the first time in days, Celeste's smile slipped. Well, just don't stay out too long. Darren may want to move furniture tonight. May want to, as if the room was already under renovation. Marlene said nothing. She stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind her. The air was cool and bright. The kind of day that looked softer than it felt. She stood on the porch for a moment, letting her lungs fill. Then she walked to the bus stop at the corner, one careful step at a time, her handbag tucked close under her arm. She had not taken the city bus alone in nearly 3 years. Not since her knee had gotten worse. Not since Darren had started saying, "Just let me handle things, Mom." Not since little by little, help had become supervision. The bus arrived with a hiss. Marlene climbed aboard, paid her fare, and took a seat by the window. As the neighborhood rolled by, she kept one hand on her purse. She passed the pharmacy where she had worked for 28 years. The diner where Darren used to beg for pancakes on Saturdays. The church where she buried her husband. Every block carried some version of the life she had built. And somewhere between the stoplight on Maple and the old courthouse square, something in her posture changed. Not dramatically, but enough. By the time she stepped off downtown, she no longer looked like a woman being pushed aside. She looked like a woman on her way to confirm something. Harold Bennett's office sat above a quiet insurance agency in a red brick building with brass numbers beside the door. The waiting room smelled faintly of paper, lemon polish, and coffee that had been sitting too long. A young receptionist looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" Marlene set the business card on the desk. "I'm here to see Harold Bennett." The receptionist glanced at the card, then at Marlene's face. Something shifted in her expression. "One moment, please." She disappeared down the hall. A minute later, an older man in a gray suit stepped into view. He paused when he saw Marlene. For a second, his face softened with recognition. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." Marlene stood. "Yes," she said, "I think it has." He led her into his office and shut the door. The room was lined with bookshelves and framed certificates. A clock ticked softly on the wall. Everything inside felt steady, ordered. Nothing like the house she had left that morning. Harold Bennett did not rush her. He waited until she sat down. Then he looked at the envelope in her hands and gave a slow nod, as if he had known this day might come. "Your husband asked me to expect you," he said. Marlene stared at him. "He said that if you ever came here alone, I should listen carefully before I spoke." The words settled over the room. For a moment, Marlene could not answer. Harold opened a file drawer and removed a thick folder with the name Whitaker printed across the tab. He placed it on the desk between them. "There are some things," he said, "about your home and your late husband's planning that I believe you were never fully told. Not because he wanted to hide them from you, but because he hoped you would never need them." Marlene's fingers tightened around the arms of the chair. Above the desk, the clock kept ticking, steady, quiet, unbothered. She thought of the basement bed, the cold, the nursery catalog, Celeste saying "our home." Then Harold opened the folder, and the first page he turned toward her made Marlene go completely still. The first page Harold Bennett turned toward Marlene was a copy of the house deed. Her name was on it, only hers. Marlene stared at the paper without moving. Harold let the silence sit. Then he spoke in the calm voice of a man who had explained hard truths for a living. "Your husband updated everything after his first heart scare," he said. "The house was protected, fully. No one can claim it unless you allow it." Marlene looked up slowly. "No one?" He folded his hands on the desk. "No son, no daughter-in-law, no relative living there. Not now, not later, not unless you choose it." For a moment, she could not even feel the chair beneath her. All those months Darren had spoken about the house as if it were already drifting toward him. All those little comments, all that quiet entitlement. None of it had been true. Harold slid another document closer, but did not push it into her hands yet. "There is more," he said. "Your husband also left instructions concerning your will. It can be changed at any time. He wanted you to know that if people around you ever confused your kindness with surrender." That sentence landed deeper than the legal words. Kindness with surrender. Marlene lowered her eyes to the page again. The letters blurred for a second, then steadied. "So they have no right," she said quietly. "That is correct." Harold watched her face. "Mrs. Whitaker, You do not need to decide anything today. But if something is happening in that house, you should know this much. Silence does not weaken your position. Sometimes it protects it. Marlene gave the smallest nod. Then she asked the question that mattered most. If I do nothing yet, they won't know? Harold answered without hesitation. No, not unless you tell them. She sat very still after that, not with fear, with thought. There was power in knowing something the others did not. Not the ugly kind, not the kind that shouts, the kind that waits, the kind that watches people show their true faces when they think no one can stop them. When Marlene finally rose to leave, Harold walked her to the door. Call me before you act, he said. She held his card a little tighter. I will. On the bus ride home, the city looked different. Nothing outside had changed. The pharmacy was still there. The church steps were still worn smooth. The diner window still held the same faded pie sign. But inside Marlene, something had shifted. The house was still hers. That truth sat quietly in her chest like a steady light. When she stepped through the front door, she heard music drifting down from upstairs. Soft, cheerful, wrong. Celeste had the bedroom door wide open. Marlene stopped in the hallway. The room barely looked like her room anymore. Her lavender bedspread was gone. The curtains had been replaced with pale cream ones, dotted with tiny moons. A new white crib stood by the window. Gift bags were stacked in the corner. And her late husband's rocking chair had been moved beside the nursery wall, dressed up with a folded baby blanket as if it had always belonged there. Celeste stood in the middle of it, holding her phone high. She turned, smiling toward the light. Oh, perfect, she murmured to herself, taking another picture. This one's going online. Marlene did not speak. She only watched. Celeste typed for a few seconds, then laughed softly at something on the screen. A second later, Marlene heard the little sound of a posted photo going live. My dream nursery is finally coming together, Celeste said under her breath. Built with so much love. Built with so much love. Marlene felt that line like a cold hand on her neck. Her eyes moved across the room again. The lamp by the bed had been replaced. Her quilt was gone. Even the framed photograph of her husband had disappeared from the dresser. Not broken, not lost, just removed, as if his memory did not fit the theme. Celeste noticed her then. Oh, she said with a quick start. I didn't hear you. Marlene's gaze stayed on the rocking chair. That was my husband's. Celeste glanced at it. Yes, well, it looks sweet in here, doesn't it? Vintage is back. Vintage. That was what the chair had become now. Not history, not memory, not love, a style choice. Celeste set down her phone and adjusted the blanket over the chair arm. We're having people over for a little shower next week, she said. Just close friends and family. I thought this room would photograph best. This room. Not your room. Not Marlene's room. Marlene looked at her for one long second, then turned away. She went back downstairs without a word. The basement felt colder than it had the night before. Or maybe she just felt it more now. That evening, her joints burned. Her fingers were stiff. A damp ache settled into her lower back and stayed there. She heated a towel in the microwave and laid it across her knees, then sat alone on the narrow bed while footsteps moved overhead. Above her, life continued in warmth. Below, she listened to pipes knock inside the walls. Around 7, Darren came down carrying a box. He set it near the foot of the bed. Some of the last stuff from upstairs, he said. Marlene looked inside. Her winter sweaters, a framed church photo, the lamp that used to sit beside her bed. No apology, not even discomfort this time. Just an errand completed. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked around the basement as if checking a storage unit. You doing okay down here? Marlene met his eyes. Yes. He nodded too quickly. Good, good. Then he went back upstairs. That was all. Later that night, she heard him laughing with Celeste through the floorboards. Not cruel laughter, just ordinary laughter. And somehow that made it worse, because it meant they had already folded her humiliation into normal life. Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Marlene was upstairs before Celeste could answer it. When she opened the front door, Tessa stood there, holding a paper bag from the bakery on Main Street. She smiled the moment she saw her grandmother. Hi, Grandma. That one word sounded different from everyone else's voice in the house. Warmer, still human. Tessa stepped inside, then paused. Her smile faded. She looked toward the staircase, then toward the basement door, then back at Marlene. Why is your bedroom full of baby stuff? Marlene said nothing. Tessa's face changed. Not confusion now, understanding. "Wait," she said softly. "Are you sleeping downstairs?" Celeste appeared from the kitchen before Marlene could answer. "It's temporary," she said brightly. "We had to make room. You know how things are with a baby coming." Tessa did not look at her. She kept her eyes on Marlene. And in that quiet little gap, Marlene saw something she had not seen in days. Outrage, love, and the simple instinct to protect. That evening, after Celeste went upstairs and Darren stepped out to take a call, Tessa carried 2 mugs of tea down to the basement. She set one beside her grandmother and sat on the crate across from the bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tessa looked around the cold little room, her eyes shining with anger she was trying hard to control. "This is wrong," she said. Marlene wrapped both hands around the warm mug. "Yes," she said, "it is." Tessa leaned forward. "Why are you letting them do this?" Marlene held her granddaughter's gaze. Because that was the question, wasn't it? Why had she stayed quiet? Why had she watched? Why had she not reminded them whose house they were standing in? She could have answered a dozen ways. Because she was tired. Because grief had made her slower. Because mothers sometimes spend too long hoping their children will correct themselves. But that was not the answer she gave. Instead, she asked, very gently, "Could you drive me somewhere tomorrow morning?" Tessa blinked. "Of course. Where?" Marlene reached for her handbag beside the bed. Then she looked up and said the one thing that made Tessa sit straighter in her seat. "To my lawyer." Tessa did not ask questions on the drive downtown. Not at first. She kept both hands on the wheel and glanced at her grandmother now and then, as if afraid one wrong word might break something fragile. Marlene sat beside her with her handbag in her lap and the seatbelt drawn neatly across her coat. She looked calm from the outside. Too calm, maybe. But inside, her thoughts were moving with the quiet precision of a lock turning. Outside the windshield, the town passed in familiar pieces. The diner, the post office, the church corner where Marlene still slowed her gaze without meaning to. Tessa cleared her throat. "Is this about the room?" Marlene looked out the window a moment longer. "It's about more than the room." That answer filled the car with a deeper silence. Tessa did not press. She was young enough to want the whole truth right away. But unlike the others in that house, she still knew how to wait when waiting mattered. When they reached Harold Bennett's office, Tessa parked by the curb and came around to help Marlene out. She offered an arm, not because she thought Marlene was helpless, because she was paying attention. That, more than anything, made Marlene's chest tighten. Inside, the receptionist recognized them immediately. "Mr. Bennett is expecting you," she said. Tessa glanced at her grandmother. "Expecting?" Marlene only gave a small nod. Harold greeted them at the door to his office. He shook Tessa's hand, then motioned for both of them to sit. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Harold folded his hands over the folder on his desk and looked at Tessa. "Your grandmother has asked that you hear this with her." Tessa straightened in her chair. Harold opened the folder. "The house belongs entirely to Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "It has for years. No one currently living in that home has any legal claim to it unless she grants one." Tessa's eyes widened. She turned toward Marlene. "Dad thinks it's his someday." "I know," Marlene said. The room fell quiet again. Harold slid 2 papers forward, then another. "There is also the matter of inheritance. Your grandmother's will can be revised. That is what she came here to discuss." Tessa looked from the documents to Marlene, confusion giving way to concern. "Grandma, what are you doing?" Marlene placed one hand over the papers, but did not sign yet. For a moment, she seemed to drift somewhere far older than the office. Somewhere beyond the cold basement and the stolen bedroom and the nursery pictures online. She was remembering Tessa at 8 years old, sitting beside her husband's hospital bed, reading aloud because his hands were too weak to hold the page. She was remembering Tessa at 14, bringing soup after Marlene's surgery when Darren only called. She was remembering Tessa last Christmas, standing in the kitchen alone washing dishes no one had asked her to touch. Love did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived in small acts no one applauded. Marlene looked up. The house should go to the person who still knows what a home is. Tessa's face changed. At first, she looked stunned, then hurt. Not from greed, from the weight of what that sentence meant. "Grandma, no," she said quickly. "You don't have to do that. I didn't come here for that." I know you didn't. That's not why I drove you. I know that too. Harold said nothing. He only waited. Marlene's voice stayed soft. That is exactly why I'm doing it. Tessa blinked hard and looked down at her hands. For one brief second, her eyes filled, but she fought it back. Harold turned the first page toward Marlene and pointed to the marked line. This document transfers future inheritance rights of the property to Tessa Whitaker. It does not affect your control while you are living. The house remains fully yours. No one can remove you. No one can force a sale. No one can override your wishes. Marlene listened carefully. Control while living. That mattered. This was not revenge born from hurt. It was order restored by truth. And the second paper? She asked. Harold touched the next document. A sealed statement to be opened in the event of a dispute. It explains your decision in your own words. Tessa looked up again. You wrote that too? Marlene nodded. Last night. Truthfully, she had written most of it after midnight, sitting on the basement bed with the lamp humming beside her, while laughter drifted from the nursery floor above her head. She had written without bitterness. That surprised even her. No shouting, no long list of wounds. Just one clear truth after another. A home does not belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the one who protects the dignity inside it. Harold placed a pen in front of her. Marlene took it. Her hand trembled once, not from doubt, from age, from arthritis, from everything life took out of the body, even when the mind remained clear. Tessa noticed and reached forward. Do you want me to? No, Marlene said gently. Then she signed. One quiet paper, then the next. The sound of pen on legal stock was almost nothing, but in that small sound, the shape of the family's future changed. Harold gathered the pages and checked each line carefully. It's done, he said. Tessa leaned back slowly, still trying to catch up to the moment. Dad is going to lose his mind. Harold's mouth twitched, but he remained professional. Your father will only lose what was never his. That line hung in the room. Marlene let out a long breath she had been carrying for days. Not relief exactly. Something steadier. Decision. Before they left, Harold handed Marlene a copy in a sealed envelope. Keep this somewhere safe, he said, and call me before any confrontation, especially if they start making plans that assume ownership. Marlene thought of the nursery shower, the social media posts, the way Darren had said, we're just trying to make the house work. They were already making plans. That was the danger of people who believed kindness meant permission. They built their future on land they had never earned. On the way home, Tessa drove slower. This time, she did ask questions. Are you going to tell them? Not yet. Why not? Marlene rested one hand on her purse where the sealed copy now sat. Because people speak most honestly when they think they've already won. Tessa was quiet after that. When they pulled into the driveway, Darren's car was already there. So was a delivery van. Through the front window, Marlene could see large white boxes stacked in the entry hall. Furniture, new furniture, for the baby, for the room, for the future they were arranging inside her house. The moment Marlene stepped through the door, Celeste appeared in the hallway, smiling too brightly. Perfect timing, she said. We were just talking about next week. Marlene removed her gloves. Were you? Celeste nodded, almost glowing now. Yes, we thought the baby shower would be the ideal time to share some exciting family news. Behind her, Darren came into view carrying a box cutter. He looked tired, but pleased with himself, like a man already picturing the life ahead. He gave his mother a quick smile. We didn't want to say anything until it felt real, he said. But now that the nursery's done, it might be the right moment. Marlene looked from his face to Celeste's, then to the towering boxes in her hallway, then back again. And what? She asked quietly. Feels real. Celeste and Darren exchanged a glance, the kind shared by two people who believed the hard part was over. Then Celeste smiled and said the words that made Marlene go completely still. We're thinking it's finally time to talk about putting the house in our name. We're thinking it's finally time to talk about putting the house in our name. Celeste said it with a smile, as if she were offering Marlene something generous. Darren stood behind her, holding the box cutter at his side, not meeting his mother's eyes. For one long second, Marlene said nothing. Then she took off her coat, hung it carefully by the door, and looked at them both. Not tonight, she said. Celeste's smile stiffened. We're only trying to be practical. I'm sure you are, Marlene said. Her voice stayed calm. almost gentle. That unsettled them more than anger would have. She walked past the boxes and headed toward the basement stairs with her handbag tucked close against her side. Behind her, she could feel Celeste watching, waiting for a crack, waiting for weakness, waiting for the old woman downstairs to stay exactly where they had put her. But something had changed. Marlene knew it. Tessa knew it. And by the end of the week, everyone else would too. The baby shower came on Saturday. By noon, the house was full of soft laughter, tissue paper, ribbon, and women carrying casserole dishes through the front hall. There were pastel balloons tied to the staircase, a white sheet cake on the dining table, a banner above the fireplace that read "Welcome Baby Noah." Celeste glowed in pale blue. Darren moved through the guests with paper cups and forced cheer. And Marlene stood near the kitchen doorway in a navy dress, quiet and composed, like a woman attending something far older than a family celebration. People noticed her. More than that, they noticed where she was not. One of Celeste's friends asked, "Can we see the nursery?" Celeste smiled immediately. Of course. That was how the little parade began. Women drifting upstairs, compliments floating down the hallway, gasps over the crib, praise for the rocking chair, comments about how lucky the baby would be. Marlene did not follow them. She stayed downstairs. Tessa stayed beside her. That alone told Marlene everything. A few minutes later, the group returned, and one of Darren's cousins said with a grin, "You two really turned this place into a home." Celeste laughed and touched her belly. "We're trying." Then someone else added the line that finally brought the moment to the edge. "Well, it'll all be yours one day anyway." The room gave a warm little murmur of agreement. Normal, casual, thoughtless. That was how families buried truth sometimes, under assumptions repeated so often they started sounding like facts. Marlene set down her teacup. The small sound of porcelain meeting wood cut through the room. She lifted her eyes. "No," she said, "it won't." Silence spread faster than noise. Celeste's expression froze first, then Darren's. Someone near the fireplace gave a nervous laugh, as if maybe she was joking. But Marlene did not smile. She reached into her handbag. Tessa straightened beside her, and right then the front door opened. Harold Bennett stepped inside in a gray suit, carrying a leather folder under one arm. The room turned toward him. Celeste blinked. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "My attorney," Marlene said. That changed the air completely. Darren took one step forward. "Mom, what is this?" Harold closed the door behind him and spoke with quiet professionalism. "Mrs. Whitaker asked me to attend in the event of a public misunderstanding regarding ownership of this property." No one moved. No one even reached for cake. Celeste gave a strained little laugh. "Ownership? I think this is a bit dramatic." Harold opened the folder. "The home belongs entirely to Marlene Whitaker," he said. "It has for years. There is no shared claim, no transfer, no verbal assumption that changes that." Darren's face drained. Celeste looked at him, then back at Harold. "That can't be right." "It is," Harold said. He removed a copy of the deed and held it where both could see. Only Marlene's name appeared on the line. No Darren, no Celeste, no future promise hiding between the words. Just truth. The guests looked everywhere except at the couple. One older aunt slowly set down her fork. A cousin near the stairs whispered, "Oh my lord." Darren stared at the paper as if looking hard enough might change it. "Mom," he said, his voice low now, "why would you do this here?" Marlene held his gaze. "Because this is where you chose to build your assumption." Celeste stepped in then, her voice tightening. "We never meant anything disrespectful. We were only trying to plan ahead. For the baby. For family." "For family," Marlene repeated. Her tone never rose. That made every word land harder. "You took my bedroom for your comfort. You moved my things like they were in your way. You spoke about this house as if I were already gone, and you did it while I was still paying the heat, the tax, and the price of watching my own son stay silent." No one in the room could hide from that. Darren looked down. That was the first sign of karma. Not money, not eviction, not punishment shouted across a room. Just a man being made to stand inside the truth of what he had allowed. Harold placed one more document on the table. "There is also an updated inheritance filing," he said. "The future rights to this property have already been assigned." Celeste's head snapped up. "To who?" she asked. Marlene turned to Tessa. The whole room followed her eyes. "Tessa," Marlene said, "to the one person in this house who still remembered I was human." Tessa's hand flew to her mouth. Celeste went pale. Darren looked like the floor had opened beneath him. "You gave the house to her?" he said. "No," Marlene answered. "I gave it to kindness." That was the moment her dignity returned in full. Not because she humiliated them, because she no longer stood there asking to be respected. She stood there with the law, the truth, and her own name behind her. No one spoke for several seconds. Then one of the older women near the table said softly, almost to herself, "Good for her." It broke the spell. A few people looked embarrassed, a few looked relieved, a few looked at Darren and Celeste in a way they had never been looked at before, seen clearly. Marlene picked up her teacup again with steady hands. "When old people go quiet," she said, "some folks think it means they've given up. Sometimes it only means they've stopped arguing with people who have already revealed themselves." Then she turned to Harold. "Hey, would you stay a few minutes longer?" "Of course," he said. Darren opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Celeste looked around the room she had staged so carefully, and for the first time, it no longer looked like a victory. It looked borrowed, and everyone knew it. "You gave the house to her?" Darren's voice sounded thin now, smaller than it had ever sounded in that house. Marlene looked at him across the baby shower decorations, the half-cut cake, the pastel ribbons, the room that had been dressed for celebration and had turned, in a matter of minutes, into something else entirely, a reckoning. "I gave it to kindness," she said again. No one interrupted her, not Celeste, not Harold, not the guests who had suddenly become very interested in their napkins and paper plates, because everyone in that room could feel it. This was no longer about a deed. It was about who had forgotten what decency cost. Darren swallowed hard. Then he asked the question that had been rising in him since the moment Harold opened that folder. "So when did you decide," he said, his voice unsteady now, "that we weren't your family anymore?" That line hung in the room. And for the first time all afternoon, something in Marlene's face shifted. Not anger, not triumph, something sadder than both. She looked at her son for a long moment before answering. "I never decided that," she said. "You did." The words landed clean. No shouting, no cruelty, just truth with nowhere left to hide. Celeste stepped in quickly, like someone trying to pull a conversation back before it turned into a verdict. "This is unfair," she said. "We made room for the baby, that's all. People rearrange houses all the time. You're acting like we threw you out." Marlene turned to her. "You moved me into a basement in my own home." Celeste opened her mouth, then closed it. Marlene's voice stayed even. "You took the warmest room in the house from the woman who paid for it. You called my life clutter. You turned my husband's chair into decoration. And you expected me to smile while you planned a future around my silence." Celeste's face flushed. "That's not how it was." Tessa spoke before Marlene could. "That's exactly how it was." Every head in the room turned toward her. Tessa had been quiet most of the afternoon. Quiet in the way Marlene had been quiet, but there was steel in it now. She stepped forward, eyes bright. "I saw the basement," she said. "I saw where she was sleeping. I saw what they did to her room. Nobody asked if she was okay. Nobody asked what it felt like. You just kept talking about the nursery and the shower and what looked good in pictures." Celeste's composure cracked. "You don't understand." "No," Tessa said. "You didn't understand." That was the moment Darren finally sat down. Not because anyone told him to, because his legs seemed to stop trusting him. He dropped into the armchair near the fireplace and pressed one hand over his mouth. His eyes had gone glassy, but he still was not crying. He was doing what people do when regret arrives too late to be useful. Marlene had seen that look before, at funerals, at hospital bedsides, at the edge of mistakes people thought they had more time to fix. Harold closed the folder quietly and stepped back. He had done what he came to do. The rest belonged to family. Darren lowered his hand. "I didn't think," he began, then stopped. Because what could he say? "I didn't think the basement was that bad. I didn't think you'd mind that much. I didn't think my wife meant it like that. I didn't think you'd ever push back." Every version sounded worse out loud. Marlene helped him by saying what he could not. "You didn't think I had anywhere left inside me to draw a line." Darren looked at her, and this time he did cry. Not loudly, just one raw, helpless break in his face that made him look for 1 second like the boy he used to be. "I'm sorry, Mom." The room stayed still. Those words should have fixed something. Years ago, they might have. But some apologies arrive after the damage has already settled into the walls. Marlene walked closer, though not too close. She looked down at him with tired eyes and a steady heart. "I believe you're sorry now," she said, "but you weren't sorry when I carried my blankets downstairs alone." Darren shut his eyes. "I know. You weren't sorry when she called my things old, when my room became your plan. When this house stopped being mine in the way you spoke about it." His shoulders dropped lower with every line. Celeste looked from one face to another, as if still hoping someone would rescue her from the shape of this afternoon. No one did. Finally, she said, quieter now, "We never thought you'd do something like this." Marlene looked at her. "That is because neither of you ever truly believed I still belonged to myself." Another silence. Deeper this time. The kind that forces people to hear themselves. Then Marlene did something no one expected. She softened. Not her decision. Not the truth. Only her voice. "I am not throwing either of you onto the street today," she said. "There is a baby coming. I know that, and I am not heartless." Celeste let out a breath she had been holding, but Marlene was not done. "You will have 30 days to make other arrangements." The relief vanished from Celeste's face. Darren looked up sharply. 30 days? Yes. Mom, please." "No," Marlene said, still calm, still controlled, still impossible now to move by guilt. "You wanted to plan ahead, so now you will." Darren stood too fast, then stopped himself. "Where are we supposed to go?" Marlene held his gaze. "The same way everyone else does, by figuring it out before they treat the person helping them like she no longer matters." That line cut through the room, but it was not cruel, it was earned. Tessa moved quietly to Marlene's side, not to shield her, to stand with her. The guests began gathering their purses and casserole dishes in embarrassed silence. A few paused near Marlene on their way out. One squeezed her hand. Another whispered, "You did the right thing." No one said goodbye to Celeste. That told its own story. By evening, the house had emptied. The balloons still hung by the stairs. The banner still drooped above the fireplace. Torn wrapping paper sat in one corner, like evidence from a celebration that had collapsed under the weight of truth. Harold had gone. Tessa had stayed. Darren had shut himself in the den. Celeste had not come downstairs in over an hour. Marlene stood at the foot of the staircase and looked up toward the room that used to be hers. Then Tessa touched her arm gently. "Do you want me to go with you?" Marlene gave a faint smile. "No, sweetheart. I think I should do this part myself." She climbed the stairs slowly. Each step felt different from the ones she had taken carrying blankets down. Those had felt like surrender. These felt like return. When she reached the doorway, she paused. The crib was still there. The folded blankets, the moon-patterned curtains, the rocking chair by the wall. The room was quiet now. No cameras, no laughter, no one calling it theirs. Marlene walked to the bed, sat down on the mattress that had once held her grief, her marriage, her prayers, and the ordinary weight of old age. Then she set her hand on the quilt. Her quilt. The one Tessa had already carried back upstairs while no one was looking. That nearly undid her. Not because it was grand, because it was love. Down the hall, she could hear the muffled sound of Darren crying somewhere behind a closed door. For a long moment, she simply sat there and listened. Then she looked toward the window, where the last light of day had turned soft and gold. And in the hush of her own room, Marlene finally understood something she wished more people knew before it was too late. The silence of the elderly is not surrender. Sometimes it is the last form of dignity left. And sometimes, when the time is right, it is how justice enters the room without ever having to shout. Some wounds do not need revenge. They only need truth to be spoken at the right time. Marlene did not shout. She did not beg. She did not fight for dignity with noise. She simply waited until the people who had mistaken her silence for weakness revealed exactly who they were. And when the moment came, she answered them with calm, with truth, and with one quiet signature that changed everything. Because growing old does not mean becoming powerless. And silence from an elder is not always surrender. Sometimes it is the final warning before justice speaks. If this story moved you, let me ask you something. Did Marlene do the right thing by leaving the house to Tessa? Or should she have given her son one more chance before making that decision? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you believe older parents deserve dignity, respect, and protection in their own homes, make sure to like this video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because the next story might hit even closer to home.